This rod of sapphire was grown in the 80s to defend against heat-seeking missiles, but it never made it onto a plane, and now I'm gonna turn it into a D20. I'll talk more about how that would have worked, but for now, let's get it on the dop and start cutting. I'm faceting this with my cut kit. It's a way to start faceting gems for under $500, and we've just launched a dice cutting add-on package if you want to try doing this yourself. First off, I'm roughing in the shape with a 100 grit lap. That's really coarse, it's almost bashing it with a rock, but sapphire is hard and there's a lot to remove at this stage, so it saves a lot of time. Next, I remove all the damage I did with a 240 grit lap, and finally use a 600 grit lap to refine the shape and get everything in position. The actual cutting on a D20 is really simple. Each side only has 2 sets of 5 facets, so it's really easy to keep it all in your head, and the shape emerges really quickly from the stone. Now the magic really starts when we get to the pre-polish phase, where the stone's surface goes from frosted to transparent. I used 8,000 grit on a copper lap for this, though 3,000 is even better for sapphire. At this point, it's really starting to sparkle, and all that's left is the final polish. But first, I need to cut in some relief facets on these huge lower faces. These will be a lot smaller when the die's finished, and cutting these facets 4 degrees off on either side gets them smaller, closer to that final shape, and a lot easier to polish. Polishing is done with 60,000 grit diamond. Polishing facets this big can be tricky and time-consuming. I found that after a while, the lap would start scratching the stone, and I would need to clean it off and recharge it. And the whole process is a bit slow, but in the end, they came up really bright and beautiful. Now I transfer the stone to another dop so I can cut the second half. I mentioned earlier that this sapphire was meant to defend from heat-seeking missiles. The way that works is they would have hollowed out the rod and put a cesium flare inside. The entire thing is then surrounded by an array of mirrors that can spin. When it's activated, the flares fire up and the mirrors start spinning, making powerful strobes of infrared light which would have blinded the sensors on the missile. They were put on military aircraft, Air Force One, and even the space shuttle when it was touring Europe, just in case the Soviets tried anything silly. They used to call this array R2-D2 for obvious reasons. Now back to the die. Cutting the second half is really nerve-wracking because if I overcut or misindex, it's really hard to recover, but it also goes a lot faster than the first half. I just made sure to leave a lot of extra space for the final cutting and did a lot of work at the pre-polish stage. I did misindex a couple of times, but nothing that I couldn't recover from. And here it is, and I gotta say, it's awfully sparkly. Now, let's get it off the dop and see what we've got. You know, it's not completely perfect, but I'm pretty happy with how it came out. And now it's time to put on the numbers. I use a Cameo vinyl cutter to make self-adhesive stickers, and painstakingly peel and place them face by face on the die. I'll be honest, this part is really fun and relaxing. Then, once the edges are covered with Plasti-Dip, it's ready to sandblast. I use a cheap Vevor dental sandblasting cabinet, silicon carbide grit, and a Harbor Freight air compressor. Around $500 worth of equipment. I'm still figuring out the best way to do this. It mostly went well, but the center of the 4-on-14 flew off, so it ended up filled in. But now let's get that all off and see how it looks. You know, I like it. There's something magical about all the frosted numbers floating and reflecting within the die. And since it was grown for infrared countermeasures, I think it's only fair that you get a +2 bonus on saving rolls against fire. And the final weight is 52 carats. And the stone is available on gemsofscience.com. Or, if you want to try faceting one yourself, we're taking pre-orders for our next round of cut kits, and our new dice cutting add-on includes an 80 index gear, a 100 grit lap for roughing, and 2 pieces of dice rough, one of these IR defense sapphires, and a cone of golden laser garnet. You can check all that out at the link in my bio, or on facet.ing.